Hello to you.
It's a moment, hello back, for Rachel Reeves, isn't it?
It is a moment for Rachel Reeves, and it's not all a good moment for Rachel Reeves. She told us this morning she's proud of her budget, but there are very serious questions about her antics in the run-up to said budget. And I think while the markets were calm in the wake of her statement on Wednesday, this weekend, the politics are anything but.
Let's get underway with Sunday's newscast.
It's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Henry at home.
Ah, Henry, hello. And Henry, you were one of the real clever clogs earlier in the week when you spotted that the numbers in the run-up to the budget from the official homework checkers, the Office for Budget Responsibility, were not as bad as people had concluded from all the mood music.
Yeah, and we didn't have the whole chronology at that point, but I was sitting on the Politics Live set in the immediate aftermath of the budget, and I didn't have to get very far into the OBR's documents. This time they'd actually been physically published rather than accidentally released online a few hours earlier. I mean, page 3, where they said that they sent the final forecasts to the Chancellor at the end of October. And that was a few days before Rachel Reeves had me standing outside Downing Street, among other people, at the crack of dawn, before she warned us all that taxes were going to go up because of their productivity downgrades, among other things. And that really has become, I think, the heart of the budget story this weekend. I mean, one of Rachel Reeves' innovations, as you were discussing with, I think, Jeremy Hunt on Newscast a week ago, is to be interviewed as Chancellor after the budget rather than before the budget. And I wonder if today she's wishing she hadn't come up with that innovation.
So, Paddy, what's the clearest way of explaining all of this if people haven't been paying attention?
For me, it's useful to remind ourselves that the budget is seen as an economic event, and we've forgotten, it seems, it's a political event. The Chancellor is allowed to make political decisions. That is what the budget is. What's happened here is there's been an unusual press conference which appeared to put the economic case out there first. So I would say that actually she's perfectly allowed to make a budget as a Chancellor, but something's happened in the sequencing which has confused the political, the economic and the journalistic classes over what was the state of the books to make you to make political decisions.
And that's absolutely right. It's legitimate to make almost any political decisions that they want, as long as they're within the law. But in terms of what's happened here in the run-up to the budget, in case you weren't paying attention, Rachel Reeves gave the impression that the economy was in the worse shape than she'd thought, and therefore she was going to have to put taxes to fill that in, to sort of undo some of that damage, in order that she then would have a healthy buffer, as they called it, the headroom, so that kind of she had a bigger rainy day pot of money. What we now know is that the official number crunchers had told her actually that hole in the books wasn't nearly as big as they'd suggested it was going to be. So question comes, well, she didn't have to put up taxes that much to do it, to the tune of £26 billion. Actually, she put up taxes partly to create the buffer, but also to spend an extra 16 billion quid on welfare payments. And the Tories are crying foul and saying that she lied and misled everybody, and they're calling for an investigation. So when Rachel Reeves came into the studio this morning, this question of did she or did she not tell us the whole truth and nothing but the truth before the budget was the first thing that we asked her about. Let's have a listen to how she defended herself. You gave the impression in the run-up to the budget that you would have no choice but to put our taxes up because the economy was short of cash. That wasn't the case.
Well, I'm really pleased that you give me a chance to answer that question directly. In the speech that I gave a couple of weeks before the budget, I said that my priorities would be to cut waiting lists in the NHS, cut the cost of living and cut the debt and borrowing.
Forgive me, Chancellor, we need to go through this in detail. I don't want anyone to fall asleep in their cornflakes, but I need to explain the detail of what this is about. It's not about your overall political motivations, and you reminding us of those this morning. It's about the specifics of what you said. Now, on November the 4th, you said very publicly the economy had less cash than previously thought. I don't want to use the jargon, but it's a productivity downgrade for people who've been following it. Your message was plainly, sorry, everyone in the country, there's less than we thought, so I'm going to have to put your taxes up.
Yeah.
That was not entirely true, was it?
Yes. In the spring, I had headroom of £9.9 billion. The OBR numbers show that it moved around, but in their final pre-measures forecast, it was £4.2 billion. I clearly could not deliver a budget with just £4.2 billion of headroom.
I'm asking you to address this question directly.
Yes.
On November the 10th, you told the BBC, sticking to your election promise not to put taxes up would require deep cuts in spending on long-term projects. We know now you'd been told you had an extra £4 billion to play with. It wasn't true to say that, was it? Was it a lie?
I didn't have an extra £4 billion to play with. There was a downgrade in the headroom from £9.9 billion to £4.2 billion. But I was very clear in that speech on the 4th of November. I didn't want to have less headroom. I wanted to have more headroom. And the context of the budget, the biggest thing that changed was a downgrade in the productivity expectation going forward, which took £16 billion. Without that downgrade, that £4 billion would have actually been £20 billion. So I had to ask people to contribute more. In the end, I was able to keep that as low as possible with freezing the thresholds, not increasing the rates of tax. But I have asked people to pay more by freezing those thresholds for an additional 3 years. I recognise that, but I believe it was the right thing to do to be able to protect, particularly that investment into
Chancellor,
the National Health Service.
So, Henry, Rachel Reeves denied that she misled anyone. But do you think that her explanations this morning make this potentially very tricky political row go away in the way that she would want them to?
No, I don't think they do. I think this is very difficult for the Chancellor indeed. And I think it's because this row, slightly technical though it is, goes with the grain rather than against the grain. Let me explain what I mean. The big question in the months and weeks in the run-up to this budget when we were talking and speculating about what they might do on tax was, is this government honest? Is this government going to do what it promised it would do in the run-up to the general election? So that was always the frame through which this budget was going to be seen. I think that's the reason why they ultimately backed off from increasing the main rates of income tax, because they feared that people would think it was dishonest to do that when they said they wouldn't do so in their manifesto. This is now an additional question about honesty. So it compounds, rather than confounds, what we have been talking about for the past few weeks and months. And I think for a government which, in the form of Keir Starmer, already has as one of the main criticisms it faces from its political opponents, on left and right, an issue of honesty. How does Keir Starmer now relate to the Keir Starmer of 2020 and his 10 pledges in his leadership campaign, and then the Keir Starmer of 2022, 23, and so on? I think it's really quite politically damaging indeed.
Can I ask a question? Would we be here had it not been for that news conference and the associated broadcast interview?
I don't think we would, because while people around Rachel Reeves have said things to journalists, I don't expect any member of the public to care about that, and that may well be as it should be. So you can have journalists being annoyed about feeling they were led up the garden path, but let's be real about the esteem in which our trade is held. People are not going to cry for us. However, Rachel Reeves decided to make that public in her own voice, in her own words, on a day at which we are now told she knew conclusively and finally what the Office for Budget Responsibility's assessment of the situation was. And I think that makes it difficult for her.
I think that's absolutely right. You know, briefing is briefing, and it fills up journalists' notebooks and it fills up journalists' WhatsApps and all the rest. But we touched a bit on this yesterday. It's not really about that. It's about what she told the country. Because politicians always have plausible deniability if people close to them or people who claim to be speaking for them say something. They can always say, well, I didn't know anything about that, or I didn't authorise us, nothing to do with me, I never said that. And that's part of one of the downsides of the way that our kind of political ecosystem works, is that people who speak on behalf of politicians, or even politicians speaking off the record, still have deniability when it comes to being checked back. But she said these things in front of a microphone on several occasions. And when I was asking her about the press conference specifically, or then later an interview she did the week after with our colleague Matt Chorley at 5 Live, she just didn't really want to address whether or not she had misled people. She kept coming back to, oh, but I had to do this because of the building up the headroom, and that's a really good thing, and it was a really important thing. Obviously not highlighting the fact that the reason the headroom was so small, only 9 billion last time, was also her decision. But I think there's really a lot of jeopardy now, not least, Paddy, because Keir Starmer's giving a big speech about the budget and the economy tomorrow. And what are lots and lots of the questions going to be about? They're going to be about whether he knew about this too. Today's papers say that he did. And he is, I think, unquestionably going to have to answer the accusations that, contrary to everything that he and Rachel Reeves said about how they would behave in government, they are also, as they used to claim the Tories did, playing fast and loose with the facts.
So I'd like to lean into her explanation because it is perceived by the markets as a good thing that she has increased the rainy day fund known as the headroom. Mm-hmm. That's true. Henry's told us if she hadn't given the news conference, she wouldn't be in the Stramash.
Yep.
So this is a little bit about process. There is a landing zone for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves because the public are thinking, what am I going to get? Well, the answer is 500,000 families will have more benefit because of a cap being lifted about the number of children you have.
Yep.
That's a massive deal for Labour voters. So that has happened as well.
The minimum wage is going up. Other things are happening. There will be, undoubtedly, as a result of this budget, things that help people make ends meet. There's going to be some help for people off energy bills. Some rail fares in England are being frozen. That is true. But what is also important, hugely important in Westminster, but also beyond, is whether or not people feel that they can trust the word of the Chancellor. There's a particular dynamic also about this when it comes to the financial markets, because if companies say things that are misleading publicly, there's a very strict set of rules around that in terms of the financial markets. If you can move money around by saying something that's a bit misleading, that can end up being very, very sticky indeed. Now, I'm not making accusations about what Rachel Reeves did or not, but you can see that the Tories have got a bit between their teeth on this. They're calling for an investigation by the market authorities, the Financial Conduct Authority, to say the word authority more times than is healthy before 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And there is a serious charge here because the Chancellor, above all other politicians, frankly, is the one whose word has to be their bond, not just because of the bond markets. But I think that's why it's so serious, as well as Henry suggested right at the beginning, this government already has a perception problem with whether or not they've been straight with the public. The other thing that's really been doing people's head in this morning is how Rachel Reeves kept saying, and she said it all week, I'm asking people to make a contribution, more of a contribution. This is what Leslie said about making a contribution.
Hello, I would just like someone to ask Rachel to stop saying that she's asking us to pay more tax. If she's asking me, I'm going to say no. As an NHS worker of 47 years who can't retire for another 3 years, having brought up 2 children because I could only afford to have 2 children, going back to work when both children were 8 weeks old, never claimed a benefit in my life, I'm afraid, Rachel, you're on the wrong page with me. Sorry.
And Anne sends a WhatsApp. The Chancellor said we've been asked to contribute more in the budget, but the word ask means you can say yes or no, surely. Henry, it's interesting. The public is certainly divided about the question of the 2-child cap. In fact, there's evidence a lot of people think, like Leslie does, if you can't afford to have children, don't have them. And the charge really, the central charge of this, the political one, is that the money was taken in tax in order to pay more welfare.
Yeah, and Rachel Reeves has actually acknowledged in a few interviews since Wednesday that that is essentially a choice she has made, willingly, because she believes, as do so many Labour MPs across the spectrum of the Labour Party, this isn't just a sort of Labour left demand, that lifting the 2-child cap is the most effective way to lift people out of child poverty. And there's this thing that Labour politicians keep saying since Wednesday, which is that this is going to be the best parliament, which is to say the period between 2 general elections, on record for alleviating child poverty. So, I think that is one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why on Wednesday night and Thursday and Friday and still yesterday when I was messaging some Labour MPs, this budget has gone down really well with them. I think the issue for the government is twofold. One is that, and they know this, poll after poll has shown that the two-child cap is essentially a popular policy because of the reasons that you just heard from Leslie there, that people say, well, I had 2 kids and not a third because I couldn't afford a third. That's the reason that George Osborne introduced it, essentially, as Chancellor, for that reason. And then the other thing, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to it, but I do just think it is the fundamental issue that the government is going to have to find a way to address here, is that I remember so many events, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, in the run-up to the general election, not just the short campaign, but the years beforehand, where they essentially said, this is not going to be a big spending, high tax, high spend Labour government. And, you know, we've spent all week going around the sort of semantics of the manifesto, but I actually think their political issue is much broader than that. It's kind of holistic, if that's not a ridiculous word. It's just, is this the kind of Labour government that they promised? And I think you hear in the anger, I think very obvious anger of someone like Leslie there, that some of their voters, or we don't know how Leslie voted, but some voters are just going to say, no, it's not.
And that's the big picture thing here, Henry. I think absolutely. You know, before the election and in their first few months in office, Labour gave the impression that they were going to be a government that would get to grips with welfare in terms of bringing the budgets down. Well, that's not happening. They gave the impression that they were going to be a government that helped business make money before they do anything else. Economic growth was meant to be at the top of the list. That's not how it seems to many in the business community now. They gave the impression to people that they were not really going to put taxes up. Well, they are doing that in a very big way. Whether that's breaking the spirit or the letter of the manifesto, taxes are going up. And the big impression that they gave people was that they would not. And on those issues, they've got something emerging that looks, I think, like a sort of trust deficit. And it's the same when it comes to this issue around what they said in the run-up to the budget. Exactly as we said in the beginning, it plays into this whole narrative that they cannot be trusted. And one of the other perceptions that Labour worked very hard to create in the run-up to the election was that the Tories could not be trusted, and they absolutely could. And this is how Rachel Reeves answered that suggestion when I put it to her this morning.
Well, before the election, we did set out a number of tax increases. We said we would get rid of the non-dom tax status, which we have.
Do you deny that you led people to believe you wouldn't put their taxes up, ordinary people's taxes?
Well, we had a manifesto commitment not to increase the rates of income tax, national insurance or VAT, and also that we would keep corporation tax at its current levels. In the budget last year and the budget this year, I have stuck to those. But I was really clear on that speech that you referenced on the 6th of November that I would be asking everyone to make a contribution to be able to protect funding for public services. And that is why I made the decision to freeze the tax threshold for a further 3 years. The Conservatives froze that for 7 years. We have extended it from 2028 by an additional 3 years, but we haven't changed the rates of income tax, national insurance, VAT, or indeed how we haven't changed the corporation tax rate.
But as a result of your decisions this week, 1 million more people, more than 1 million people, will start paying income tax or pay higher rates in the years to come.
2028.
You're raising an extra £8 billion out of income tax. So whether it was the spirit or the letter of your election promise that you wouldn't put taxes up on working people, you have broken that promise, have you not?
Well, I was really upfront in my speech, both in the budget this week and also on the 6th of November.
So let's be upfront now. You've broken that promise, haven't you?
Well, I have asked people to make a contribution. We didn't break the manifesto. We haven't broken the manifesto because that's explicitly said about the rates. But am I asking working people to pay a bit more? Yes, I am asking working people to pay a bit more. And I have been clear and honest about that. The Conservatives did it by sort of trying to sweep it under the carpet. I don't want to be that sort of Chancellor.
So can I just drill down into the use of the word the Labour manifesto said we wouldn't put up the rates of? There's quite a lot of work being done by the word rates.
Yeah, and I think in the manifesto, I don't have it in front of me, but they talked about not increasing taxes for working people, and they said that that meant the rate of income tax, but then it didn't use the words rates to qualify national insurance and to qualify VAT. So some people say that because of threshold changes affecting national insurance, they're breaking the letter of the manifesto on national insurance, and then there's a debate to be had about the spirit of the manifesto when it comes to income tax. I mean, I understand that a lot of that is going to lose people. Frankly, sometimes it loses me. And I think, it is true when Rachel Reeves says that she is perhaps being more overt and being more overtly criticised than the Conservatives were for extending the freeze on thresholds on income tax. And I say extending, and I stress extending, because this was pioneered by the Conservatives, and she's adding a few years to something that the Conservatives had for many years. But it does just cycle back to what we've been talking about all podcast, which is, whether that is consistent with what she said in the election, and actually in this case consistent with what she said in her budget speech last year, which now looks like a real hostage to fortune, where she essentially said that putting up, or rather extending the freeze on income tax thresholds amounted to increasing taxes on working people, and thereby a breach of her own manifesto.
The pressure on Keir Starmer tomorrow, they come as a double act, don't they? You can't see Keir Starmer without Rachel Reeves, can you, Henry?
No, and that's not because they have a political friendship which dates back decades in the way that some previous prime ministers and chancellors who've been inseparable have. It's simply because Keir Starmer, since he made Rachel Reeves Shadow Chancellor at the lowest point of his leadership of the Labour Party in mid-2021, has subcontracted economic policy and economic decisions to her. So they are absolutely indivisible economically and politically, even if he has now got his own economic advisors and took more of an involvement in this budget this year, which only sort of compounds the sense on which he's on the hook for this budget too. I think what's interesting in terms of what we can expect from the Prime Minister tomorrow, and Laura got to a bit of this in her interview with Rachel Reeves, is we can expect the Prime Minister to emphasise what he sees as the growth side of this budget. Now, to mention the Office for Budget Responsibility again, they said there was not a single policy in this budget which was appreciably pro-growth. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, I'd expect to vigorously contest that. I think it is a little bit uncomfortable, for a Prime Minister to sort of try and open up a new narrative front on this budget just a few days after the public have begun digesting a different narrative of this budget advanced by Rachel Reeves on Wednesday. But I think that's what the Prime Minister is going to try and do tomorrow, though, as Laura says, I'd expect all the questions afterwards to be about honesty.
But again, that talks to something else people have often said about this government, and something that we've discussed on many occasions. How have they got themselves into a position where at a massive moment, senior members of the government are saying things that don't quite match up just a couple of days apart? The Prime Minister told Cabinet Ministers on Tuesday they were all going to have to go out and sell the budget. Rachel Reeves stands up with her story, which is about cutting waiting lists, cutting the cost of living, cutting the debt, discussions about whether or not she really did all those things. But that political narrative from her was clear on Wednesday. It was really clear. So then for Keir Starmer then a few days later to come up with something else, to say, yeah, we do want to do all that, but actually remember, growing the economy is at the top of the list. That just doesn't quite give you the picture that this government really knows exactly what it wants to do. And that always comes back to the fundamental issue when you talk to Labour people about it. Once you're sort of a few minutes into a conversation, it's so common that they end up saying, well, the problem is that we're not really sure what Keir really wants to do. And that's why he moves around all the time.
So we spoke about Kemi Badenoch yesterday with a new style. And we made the point, a new style in Parliament is not at all the same as a success at the ballot box, but nonetheless, there's new pep there. And she is calling for the Chancellor to resign.
The Chancellor called an emergency press conference telling everyone about how terrible the state of the finances were. And now we have seen that the OBR had told her the complete opposite. She was raising taxes to pay for welfare. The only thing that was unfunded was the welfare payments which she has made, and she's doing it on the backs of a lot of people out there who are working very hard and getting poorer. And because of that, I believe she should resign.
Now, Kemi Badenoch, in her newfound confidence, clearly feels very safe making this argument politically. But I suppose what we're saying, Henry, is whatever view you take, undeniably, this is political jeopardy just at the moment when the government was hoping everything would have been calming down.
Yes, absolutely. And that is the big charge that I think in the coming week, Keir Starmer initially, and I'm sure at certain other points, Rachel Reeves and other cabinet ministers will have to rebut. I guess to kind of take the other side, in terms of where this goes next, in terms of the political jeopardy for Rachel Reeves, as far as I can tell, Labour MPs are still happy with this budget. That is not the most important frame through which to see a budget, but it is, for a Chancellor who's in trouble, a very important frame. So as long as that doesn't change, That's quite an important thing for the Chancellor, and that's quite an important achievement from the Chancellor in this budget. And also, the markets were pretty happy with this budget. Does that change tomorrow, given the stuff over the weekend and since Friday? I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. Let's see. If that does change, that'd be a problem for her. But if the markets continue to take a relatively benign view of what the Chancellor's done, especially, I guess, given the stability that extra headroom will have provided, then I think she'll still, on balance, be fairly pleased, at least on those two short-term metrics of MPs and markets.
But the problem with budgets for any government is that the political arguments and the economic facts don't always match up very happily. And it's not always a very easy story to weave.
To lead is to choose.
Yeah, to govern is to choose. It's one of the best phrases ever.
I didn't make it up, you know. It's not mine.
Oh, is it not?
No.
And there was me thinking I was quoting you all those
No,
times
you're
that
not
I've
quoting
pompously
me.
asked a politician. I said, aha, but
The
Secretary of
governor is
State,
to choose.
the governor is to choose.
Who said it, Henry? You're a collector of political quotes. Who said...
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I was just thinking that. Is it... sounds like it's probably Abraham Lincoln or
Yes.
someone like that, but I don't actually know.
It'll be someone from 100 years ago.
I think it was a British person. I don't
There's
think
also
it's a newfangled American
There's also a
phrase.
week is a long time in politics, which is...
It's the French Prime Minister, Pierre Mendès France.
Who can forget
very
Pierre Mendès France?
Although a different website says it was Nigel Lawson. Who knows? Or Thomas Jefferson.
Who can forget Thomas Jefferson? Who can forget?
I mean, Pierre Mendès France was only Prime Minister for about 8 months.
Well,
so
I
I'm not
remember
sure he
it very
made
well.
great
He was
choices.
Are you believing AI, Henry
You weren't
Zeffman?
alive, Paddy, actually.
Oh.
I might be, yeah.
I feel it's a sign when we're reaching for quotes that are helped by grok.
Gouverner,
It's probably the end
c'est choisir.
of the cast. And so, Henry at home, that's your name now for me, Henry at home.
Henry at home.
Yeah. Lovely. Goodbye from me in the studio.
Goodbye from me in the studio. Now we sound like Morecambe and Wise instead of Hinge and Brackett or French and Saunders.
And goodbye from me at home.